days at the stick. From who's got it better than us to brick by brick. It's always the 49ers way, from off-season to game day. Yeah, we talk back. It's the 49ers Cutback.
It's 49ers Cutback podcast time. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm going to talk about wide receiver draft targets for the 49ers. And the 49ers might need to address wide receiver in this draft maybe a little bit earlier than some people might think. I think there's a lot of players later on in this draft that I've been excited to talk about, break down. A bunch of those breakdowns available over on Patreon. I just think that there's a really talented class later in this draft. But I think when you look at day two potential picks, there's a lot of really good players in day two as well. And I think with the news that Brandon Ayuk is potentially not going to be ready till at least halfway through the season, and some of the question marks, about others, is Jacob Cowing going to be able to take that next step forward and be a consistent contributor to this 49ers offense? I think that there is a need for wide receiver. Now, what kind of wide receiver I think plays a big part into this as well, where you have a couple of potential ways you could go about this, right? You could find the guy that fits a Deebo Samuel type role. And I'm not talking about the wide back role. I'm talking about playing Z receiver. Find that guy that can operate over the middle of the field, that can win at times in one-on-one, but really is an intermediate threat, making catches, and then being able to produce with yards after the catch. You can look for somebody that can do that, or you could use Ricky Pearsall in that manner, which I believe you did draft Ricky Pearsall for. He's a natural Z receiver. Now, you need a X receiver right now. You signed Demarcus Robinson in free agency, and he could step in and play X, but there are question marks about how quickly he's going to be ready to go. Is he going to be suspended for the first 2 games or 4 games? We don't know that yet. We do know that he is a valuable member of this 49ers team because he can play X, and he has been able to produce in the NFL. So you do have an X receiver per se. You also have Jauan Jennings, and Jennings has normally been your slot receiver. He would play Z at times, but he wasn't really an X receiver. Well, last year with Brandon Ayuk's injury, he was thrusted out there into the role of playing X receiver, and he shined. So it's not like Jauan Jennings can't do it. But what you got is some versatile pieces with the wide receiver core. But right now, you probably are 4 deep when you think about who's going to be capable of playing at the early part of this season. You've got Jauan Jennings. He's your number 1 wide receiver right now. You've got Ricky Pearsall. You feel comfortable with what he could do after what he showed last season. Demarcus Robinson's going to be able to help this football team. He had 7 touchdowns last year for the Rams. He did a really good job as a third option out there with Los Angeles. Then you have Jacob Cowing. And what are we going to get from Jacob Cowing? I think is going to be something interesting. He's got the speed, he's got the athleticism, he's got the route running. It's all the other things that we got to see from Jacob Cowing for Kyle Shanahan to feel comfortable putting him out there on the field. And one of the things he's got to do, he's just got to get more into this playbook and understanding what his role was. One of the biggest plays for Ricky Pearsall this season was a jet sweep that he got going around the outside where he picked up, I think it was like 50 plus yards around the edge. That play was not designed for Ricky Pearsall. That play was designed for Jacob Cowing, but he lined up on the wrong side. Jauan Jennings, being the intelligent person that he is, told Ricky Pearsall, hey, you just go ahead and take it. So this is an opportunity for the 49ers to address a situation where they're lacking depth at wide receiver. So that's going to be a key factor in who we ultimately select there. 49ers got to make good selections. I think when you look at this draft overall, it's not as deep as other drafts when you're talking about how many frontline type players they are. There's also not as many really great players as early on in the draft as past years where you could get big time studs in the first 15 picks. I think now there's a couple of guys that are really legit first round picks, and then a couple of guys that are fringe first round, probably more second round picks. So you don't have the top end when it comes to this draft, and you probably don't have overall the depth that you would like. But I do think there's some good players in this draft, especially later on, that I think could contribute and help your football team if you go out there and you make a move and pick up a wide receiver. I think it'll happen. You have Isaiah Hodgins as well that you sign in free agency. You also have Russell Gage. So you have some capable bodies that are sitting there ready to compete for roster spots. But if you can get a young guy and you could get the right young guy, it could make an impact on your team. So we're going to be talking about guys. A lot of these guys are going to be in day 2. We're going to start sneaking into a little bit of day 3 with the picks. I'm also going to talk about, what happens if certain guys fall. So like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. Listening on audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network. Please give it a 5-star rating. So let's get into it. And the first guy I want to talk about is Luther Burden. And the reason I want to talk about Luther Burden, I don't want to get too deep into Burden, but there's a lot of people that are saying Luther Burden is going to fall into the second round. Now, how far would he fall into the second round? I don't know if he makes it to pick 43. But I think when you look at a player whose skill set matches the type of Z receiver that Kyle Shanahan covets, it's Luther Burden III. A guy that can make catches over the middle of the field, break tackles, and then get lots of yards after contact. So he's a yak monster that legitimately fits what Kyle Shanahan looks for. This guy, if he would have been able, or if he would have came out last year, would have been a top 10 pick in the draft. Probably the number 1 wide receiver off the board. But it wasn't as good of a season. He fell off a little bit, dealing with an ankle injury. Don't know if that contributed to some of the lack of production that he had the year before and some of the explosiveness, too, that he showed the year before. But he's 6 foot, 206, runs a 4.4 140, got the speed to press vertically if you need him to. That's one thing that he is more pure than Deebo Samuel at, would be that threat vertically. Deebo, a 4.5 guy, never really was able to threaten vertically. Occasionally he would get open, but Luther Burden's better when it comes to that category. I wouldn't say Luther Burden's as good as Deebo in the open field because right now I don't know who could possibly be as good as Deebo in the open field. He really is a special type of player. But you would be getting somebody that could fill his particular role when it comes to playing the receiver position. He had 61 catches for 676 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. And he's just a really fun player that can make a lot of things happen. When you're talking about what he does the best, it is definitely the intermediate and short area. One question mark for him if he's going to play for the 49ers would be the blocking, which he doesn't exactly do at a high level. But you're talking about a guy that can create instant separation, a great first step, the body control, the contact balance, being able to create once the ball's in his hands. He's a pretty good route runner. I would say a better route runner than Deebo Samuel is. That is for sure. And he did have a good catch rate last season. So this is a weapon that the 49ers could employ. But will he fall that far? I think there's a chance he goes at the end of the first round. I think there's a chance he goes in early round 2. But I wanted to talk about him just in case he continues to go down this slide. So Luther Burden III could be an interesting prospect for the 49ers, especially if he falls. And I know the 49ers got a lot of needs when it comes to this draft. But hitting on a wide receiver that you think can make an impact on your offense right away, we know is something they hold very valuable, right? Chris Foerster talked about he'd rather get the skilled players than the offensive linemen. And I think there's a lot of people that disagree with that. And I think that's okay to disagree because the offensive line is important. But I think when you're looking at a talent and the way the 49ers draft, and that's kind of the vision and the angle that I'm going with is how they do it, wide receiver at 43 would not shock me at all. And so I think finding a guy that could sit there, and I think Luther Burden would be one of those guys that he's just too enticing, too big of an impact that he could make on your football team, especially not having Brandon Ayuk. Now, that would mean, as of right now, you would be counting on Jawan Jennings and Demarcus Robinson to play X receiver. That means that Luther Burden would play a lot in the 3 receiver sets, and where you could kind of move Ricky Pearsall around. So it would be an interesting pick. It's not the straight X receiver that I think the 49ers would ultimately like to get because that makes the most sense as far as Brandon Ayuk and then finding another X receiver. Now, an X receiver they could get at 43, and what's crazy is, right, probably like a month ago, you had a shot at getting him at a 75, but now I don't think there's any chance. I think that the player that I'm going to talk about next is a legit second-round pick that's probably going to go right there between pick 33 and pick 45. And I think he's very worthy of that. When you're talking about a player that matches up the best to Ted McMillan of any player in this draft, in my opinion, it is Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. 6'4", 214 pounds. He ran a 4.47, played at Iowa State last year. But the way that he runs routes, you would not know he's 6'4". He gets in and out of his breaks extremely smooth. He's able to win at the top of his routes and create separation, being able to really, press and be able to sink those hips and get out. That's not easy for a taller wide receiver. So with a taller wide receiver, normally they lumber a little bit. Corners are able to kind of squeeze down that separation. But with Higgins, you can't do that. Then he uses his big body to block you out. He uses his long arms to catch the ball away from his body. He's just a really talented guy. Now, you throw in the production last year at Iowa State, 87 catches for 1,183 yards, 9 touchdowns, 13.6 average. So just really good numbers. All the numbers at the combine match what you see on film. He's one of those guys that just gets it done athletically. He's an impressive player, but it's the intangibles that he has, the things that he's able to do on the field. Like Luther Burden's a good catcher of the football. Jaden Higgins is even better. He only had a 3% drop rate on 350 targets. The guy does not drop the football. And we know how much Kyle Shanahan loves good route running and loves the fact that they can catch the football and not have drops. These are key elements to Kyle Shanahan's wide receiver. Higgins is a guy that not only does that, but then has the size on top of it. 6'4", 214, really tremendous ability. He's got a great wingspan, able to catch balls outside of his normal radius. I mean, it's just a good catch radius that he has. He's a really good football player, consistently productive in his time. He had 5 100-yard games in 2024, and he had touchdown in 7 straight games. He can play anywhere you want him to play. He can play X, he can play Z, he can play in the slot. He's got the mental ability and football IQ to be able to handle all those roles. And this is for a big wide receiver. Now, it's not all great, right? There's always some detractors, because if it was all great, he would be a first-round pick. And I think that there are some things he can get a little bit better at. I think he can get a little bit more physical when it comes to making contested catches. That's something that he could definitely get better at. His run blocking technique, not quite there. So he's a willing blocker. He talked about the fact that he wants to block, and he wants to block hard. But I think that there's some things he could still get better at when it comes to run blocking, which is consistent with most of the wide receiver players that we're going to talk about. They need to get a little bit better when it comes to run blocking. But I think he's solid. I think this guy would be a great round 2 pick. I think he could step in day 1 with as long as his football IQ was able to translate into Kyle Shanahan's system. And we know how difficult that is, right? It was a tough transition for Brandon Ayuk. It was a tough transition for Ricky Pearsall. So I don't know how much of the playbook Higgins can handle, but from everything I've seen and everything I've read on him, it appears that he's got the football IQ to be able to handle translating to the NFL game quickly. And you might need him. He could step in and he could help you out at X receiver. I'm not saying start over Jawan Jennings early, but maybe by week 3, week 4, he could give a little bit extra reps and move Jawan around a little bit. But he also has the versatility to play the slot, to play Z when you're in your base or 11 personnel. So you've got a lot of opportunities there with Higgins. I got to admit, Higgins is one of my favorite players in this entire draft, and probably one of my favorite wide receivers. I think that he's extremely talented. I'm probably as high on him as you can get. Ted McMillan, first round, right? Emeka Ibuka, those guys are first round picks. I love those guys. I think they're extremely talented. But when you get to the range in which the 49ers start thinking wide receiver, I think that Jaden Higgins might be the top guy. And I get it. Luther Burden's fantastic, yards after the catch. But I would take Jaden Higgins over Luther Burden for what the 49ers' needs are. And I think that winning against man coverage is extremely important. And with 6'4", 214-pound frame, be able to run a 4.47, that's extreme value and size. at the position. Now, a guy that I'm not going to talk about, but I wanted to mention him is Trey Harris. I do like Trey Harris. I'm not doing a breakdown on him, but he's a guy that's definitely in the mix as well. But I want to turn to Higgins' teammate, Jaylen Noel. And Jaylen Noel is a very talented guy, a little bit different, right, than Higgins. Higgins, 6'4", 214 pounds, a big, imposing presence on the field. With Jaylen Noel, it's not that. He's 5'10", 194 pounds. He ran a 4.39. Plenty of quickness, be able to get in and out, create separation at the top of his stem. And that's what you're looking for when you're talking about wide receivers that fit in Kyle Shanahan's system, is this guy could definitely do it. And so I think that he's a very talented player. For a lot of people, they actually like him more than Higgins. Now, I like Higgins because I think the value of having the big body to go with the great route running is something that I think is needed in the 49ers system. You see with Jawan Jennings making some plays, or with Brandon Ayuk having the elite length to be able to make some catches, outside of their normal radius. And I think that that's something that I look for. But when you talk about production, Jaylen Noel was just as productive as Jaden Higgins. He had 80 catches, 1,194 yards, 8 touchdowns with a 14.9 average. So these guys were the perfect pairing and balance playing at Iowa State. Both of them were able to get things done, and both of them were able to make plays consistently. When you're talking about change of direction, Jaylen Noel is one of those guys. You talk about explosiveness. A 41.5-inch vertical leap is crazy. That shows the ability to go up and snag the ball at the highest point, even though he's only going to come in at 5'10". That is still just extremely important. If you can go up and you can battle and you can compete, you can make up for some of the height problems that you don't, have against these cornerbacks. I mean, he's not going to have a height advantage over any of those guys. His 10-yard split with a 1.51 means he is absolutely moving. He's a guy that does really well in the intermediate routes. That fits what the 49ers want. You talk about blocking, another concern. So the two Iowa State guys I would have concerns about blocking, not that they're not willing. And that's one thing I'd say all the time. If you're a willing blocker, we can teach you how to run block more effectively, right? That's what they're trying to do with Jacob Cowing. Make him a more effective run blocker with technique and timing and the things you do with your hands and your lower half, getting it in the proper position, getting your body between the man and the ball carrier. Those are extremely important. I think Noel can play bigger than Jacob Cowing when it comes to physicality in the run game. I think Higgins makes more sense when it comes to blocking, but that's not why you're drafting Jaylen Noel. You're drafting Jaylen Noel to come in and make some plays when it comes to short areas, getting the ball in space, and being able to create after the catch. He's got great footwork. The route running is on point. Maybe the best route runner in this entire draft. I think if you really looked at it, he puts corners in some really bad situations with the way that he's able to maneuver his head. His head movement is great. The way that he changes pace, the timing on his routes, he does a really good job of kind of lulling those guys to sleep sometimes and then, boom, exploding and getting open. He is sharp and crisp when running those routes. It is an excellent plant and get out of his route. He does such a good job with that. He just really makes it difficult for everyone to have problems. In every phase, he's a good route runner, whether it comes to, the things he does with his feet, the things he does with his eyes, the things he does with his body to inflict a little bit of damage on those cornerbacks when they're standing straight up and down trying to figure out where he's going. The intermediate game is where he ultimately thrives, which makes him a Kyle Shanahan guy. The ability to win over the middle of the field, catch the football, and get yards after the catch. There's not a lot of guys who do it that quickly. Now, one thing I noticed on film when I was watching him is when he makes the catch, the transition from receiver to runner is 0 to 60. Just like that, he's gone. And those are the things that Kyle Shanahan looks for in wide receivers that are going to have yak potential, is the guys that have no hesitation. They can just go from one to the other immediately. That's how you're going to get the extra yards. That's the difference between, a 10-yard catch and a 13-yard catch, is that ability to catch the ball, get upfield, and get some extra yards. He's got great hands. He's got really good body control. very fun player. I think one of the things that we have to worry about him a little bit is when you're talking about some of the size situations. How is he going to be in contested catches? How is he going to be going up for the football against bigger corners? And are bigger corners going to give him problem when it comes to press man? I think he's got the necessary releases to be able to win at the point of attack, but it is something to monitor when you're talking about the top 1% of cornerbacks coming in from college. These are pros now, and they all do it pretty well. So I think that's one of the things that needs to get better. He can't allow cornerbacks to dictate what happens on the line of scrimmage. He has to be able to get off scot-free. The 49ers can't constantly put him in the slot, for instance, to allow him to get that separation naturally. He's got to be able to play X. He's got to be able to play, Z. He's got to be able to come up there and be able to get off the football. So those are some things that I see for him. And I think that when you look at him, those are the main concerns is when it comes to size and length and contested catches and blocking. But when it comes to route running and it comes to yards after the catch, he's phenomenal. He is a fit for the San Francisco 49ers, and he's probably going to go in the second round somewhere. Late second round, early third round. Do the 49ers trade up to get him in the third round? I think that's a question mark. But Jaylen Noel, one of those guys that I think, the 49ers would really like in that category. So let's talk about Jaylen Royals, 6 foot, 205 pounds out of Utah State. And I really enjoyed his film. I think he's very talented. 55 catches, 834 yards, 6 touchdowns, 15.2 yards per catch. He ran a 4.42 at the combine. His testing was pretty good. His arm length was concerning, though. 30 and 1/8, not ideal for a NFL wide receiver. But his 10-yard split was a 1.49. That quickness off the line of scrimmage in those first 10 yards is so important for route running. Those first 10 yards are going to determine what a cornerback does, no matter what coverage they're in, right? When are they going to flip their hips and run? Are they in bail technique? When do they decide that they need to continue going upfield? Usually that 10 yards is a good determining factor, and the fact that he's so fast should put a lot of defensive backs in some difficult situations when they're in the middle of their pedal. So that's something that I think he's pretty good at. Blocking is a real concern. Jaylen Royals is not a good blocker. The other guys are a lot better that we've talked about so far. So when you're talking about that, that's a big concern. He's not as good in the intermediate routes as the other wide receivers we've talked about, but he does produce down the field vertically and can make some plays. It's the straight line speed and the ability to win initially that makes him an important player. And he can create quickly. You get the ball in his hands. He could do some things after the catch as well. You see the way that he gets in and out of his breaks. It's very smooth, very clean, which makes it tough for corners to be able to kind of drive on him and get to the football because he has great spatial awareness and body control. He's able to adjust his routes depending on where the defender's at, depending on where the zone is, and be able to make the play. So he is a yards after the catch master. He can get up there and he can make plays with it. He does a really good job in zone coverage, finding zones. So he's got talent. I think he's got to get a lot better as a blocker if he wants to be a consistent contributor for a Kyle Shanahan style offense. But I think that when you're looking for the receiver part of it, there's a lot to like there. There's some things he could definitely get better at. And I think if he did clean up some things, some weaknesses, that I think he could be a really fun player that you could get. Now, I think he's more of a third round pick, and I think a lot of people see him as a second round pick. So that's one of the concerns I have is I think if you take him at 43, that's too early. I think 75 would make a lot more sense if you're looking to go wide receiver, and we'll see. He's one of those guys. He just takes, a pass over the middle. Next thing you know, he's standing in the end zone, explosiveness. And if you're looking for a game changer and a guy that can change the game in one play, Jaylen Royals can definitely do it. I think some people have concerns as well about level of competition. He played at Utah State, so he wasn't a part of a Power 4. So there wasn't a lot of games where he played against Power 4 teams. So that's going to be something, to consider as well. But a fun player who could be available there at pick 75. Now, the next guy, I actually just did a breakdown of him over on Patreon. And John Lynch and Leonard Hakerson both went to his pro day. This is at Stanford, and that's Elic Ayomanor. And Elic Ayomanor is a big, physical, imposing player. And for a lot of people, he's going to make their top 10. Now, I haven't done a top 10 wide receiver list yet. I do think he's in the running for that because of his physical makeup. 6'2", 206 pounds. He runs a 4.4 40. That's when you're talking about size, weight, and speed, he's got it. And so I think there's a lot to like about Elic Ayomanor. And I think he's talented. He played really good at Stanford last year and had production, even though really doesn't have a good quarterback situation at Stanford. So he was able to produce and be able to create down the field vertically without a very talented quarterback. It just didn't work. Troy Taylor's offense, it wasn't clicking the way that it had in other situations and at other stops, whether that be Eastern Washington or Sac State, or even when he was the head coach of Folsom High School. I think that there was a lot of things that didn't help Ayomanor, and having a quarterback would have definitely helped. But 63 catches for 831 yards and 6 touchdowns, 13.2 yard average per. Now, the stats are not going to show a guy that's going to be able to win vertically. His 10-yard split is only a 1.58. That's not phenomenal. But when you watch him on film, his usage of the head, of the shoulders, of the stop and go, the change in speed, he's able to create separation. A lot of times, a ton of separation on cornerbacks and get open, especially on vertical routes. He's a great intermediate route runner as well. I think he could be better when it comes to yak. Goes down a little bit easier than I would like for a 6'2", 206-pound wide receiver. But there's a lot of potential there. There's an opportunity with a little bit more space and maybe a better throw by the quarterback for him to be able to get some extra yards after the catch. So he's definitely talented. He can do it vertically. He can also do it in the intermediate, and he's a good blocker. So this is a part that definitely fits what the 49ers are looking for. You got to be able to run intermediates. You've got to have the threat of a vertical threat, especially if you're going to play X receiver, and you've got to be able to block, and he does that. I think he could even get better at blocking. So he fits what the 49ers are looking for in a lot of categories. So he's checking some boxes for John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan, and then, of course, Leonard Hankerson. And he was on hand for Stanford's Pro Day, and he went out there and he had him run an extra route. And Ayomanor looked really good getting out of that break on that route. So 49ers would definitely like Ayomanor because of the things he can do, his versatility, the legitimacy when it comes to being a vertical threat, which the 49ers don't have a lot of vertical threats. So imagine having, a big guy similar to the size of Jawan Jennings, but that runs a 4.4 instead of a guy that runs a 4.7 in Jawan Jennings. And you just have the opportunity to get a vertical threat at the X receiver. And so I think that he could be a target for the 49ers. I think that he might go a little bit earlier than some are projecting right now. I think if he made it to pick 43, he could be an option there. I don't know. I don't know if he's going to make it to 75, even though there's a lot of rankings that have him lower. I think when you look at the things that he does well, he's going to check off a lot of boxes, especially for Shanahan-type offenses around this league. The intermediate ability with the vertical ability, but also able to block. That's just something you're liking from a playmaker. So I think Ayomanor is interesting. I did a more extensive breakdown over on Patreon. So if you want to know more about Ayomanor or other wide receivers like Jaden Higgins, I did a full breakdown on him as well. And so there are breakdowns available on wide receivers. And in fact, the next guy I'm going to talk about, I did a breakdown as well. And so it's interesting that, I'm going to talk about him last because he's one of my favorite guys in this draft, but he's more of a day 3 guy. And he's a day 3 guy that I wanted to bring up in this one because I wanted to highlight him a little bit, and that's Pat Bryant from Illinois. And he's not going to go in day 2. He's not. He's probably going to go somewhere in late round 4, early round 5. But what you're going to get is tremendous value. So if you want a full breakdown of him, it's going to be available on Patreon. But I am going to touch Pat Bryant as far as giving a breakdown here as well, just not as extensive with film on the other one. 6'2", 204 pounds. Now, he ran a 4.61, so you're lacking speed. That's not something you're getting out of him. Where we talked about the other guys, every one of them were 4.4 or better. And so you're not getting that speed, but what you're getting is a football player. And when I say getting a football player, he just does things the right way. He uses nuances to be able to get open. He uses his ability, his length, to be able to create separation. He's a good player. He had 54 catches for 984 yards, 10 touchdowns, with a receiving average yards per catch of 18.2. So, he just does it there. The 40 time wasn't great, but everything else was pretty good. 10 yard split, 156, not bad. His vertical was 37.5. Broad jump was 124. Like, all those things really kind of show you, and it's just consistency. He's pretty much the same, whether it's a vertical route, an intermediate route, a short route. He pretty much grades out the same. He's pretty consistent there. He competes as a run blocker. He could get better at that, but that's part of the reason that he's falling, right? But when you're talking about a guy that manipulates corners to get them to do what he wants them to do, Pat Bryant does it at a high level. He is one of those guys that just knows how to use the different intricacies of what a defender is trying to do to him to take advantage of them and create separation, and he does it at a high level. He knows what defenses are setting up to do and can set them up to be able to get in and out of his break and use his stem to create separation better than most of the wide receivers in this draft. He is really good at that. He's a natural hands catcher, so the hands are always away from the body. He's not a guy that lets it get into his pads, which usually generate drops. So being a guy that does that with a good catch radius and also good feet. He's a guy that's successfully won along the sidelines consistently. Not a lot of these guys have the body control to consistently win and get those feet in. Pat Bryant does that at a high level. So he's a guy that can win consistently on the outside. Brock Purdy loves to throw balls on the outside. He throws a lot of out routes, and he does a very good job. So him on the boundary, he is very good, and he's got the ability to toe tap in the back of the end zone. That is for sure. He's got an absolute dog mentality. How about this? A 66.7% rate of catching the ball on jump balls because of his timing. He's just phenomenal. He really fights for it. He's good at understanding where he's supposed to be in zone coverage and sitting down in the open soft spots of the zones. When you look at Pat Bryant, you just see successful wide receiver. He's going to be consistent. He's not going to wow you. He's not going to blow you away. But what he's going to go out there and do is be consistent. So if you're looking for a guy that you can plug and play and he's going to give you production, may never be elite, but it might be really good, where he's converting on getting you first downs and helping you out and making key catches along the sidelines or in the back of the end zone, Pat Bryant's one of those guys that you got to get. He does a great job, and having 10 touchdown catches in 2024 was really fantastic. Now, the drawbacks, right? He's not the fastest guy. He doesn't have the explosiveness off the line of scrimmage that you're going to get with like a Jaylen Noel or some of these other guys. So those types of things, you wonder how much he's going to be threatening NFL caliber cornerbacks vertically. I think that's a concern for him. But I think that there are things, that he definitely does well that kind of counteract that with his elite ability to use leverage and also his understanding of defense to create some opportunities as well. I think it definitely can be a problem where he'll telegraph what he's going to do. But I think that if he got a little bit more work in the NFL, they could kind of hone it in, and he wouldn't be so, I guess, transparent on what his plans are to the cornerback sometimes, and that would create even more opportunities for him. So I like him. I think that he can do really good in the NFL. I think he's a talented guy, and when you're talking, late 138 for the Niners, pick 146 in the 5th round, it could be a lot of ability there. So Pat Bryant, a guy I really like. And I know I didn't talk about everyone, right? So I didn't talk about Savion Williams. I didn't talk about, a lot of these guys, Xavier Restrepo. I didn't talk about Jack Betch either. He was another guy that I had wanted to talk about. I'm going to have to get to him on another episode because I kind of wanted to jump around a little bit. But here are some 49ers draft targets, especially in day 2. And I still think I need to talk about a lot of the day 3 guys. But, other guys, like I said, Jack Betch, he could be another target for the 49ers. So I don't want to ignore him. I just don't have enough time to go through all those guys on this episode. But there'll be plenty of time to talk about more wide receivers in this draft. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're listening to audio platform, 49ers Cutback on Believe Network, please give it a 5-star rating. Thank you all for joining me. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, stay safe. Remember, the right way is always the 49ers way.